Oh hey, it's another instance of me discovering a strange gaming relic from a bygone era and wanting to showcase it to the world because I think that would be fun to do. And before I dig up something like Total Distortion or a long-forgotten 3DO title, because I love spelunking or dumpster diving. Nothing like getting coated in trash and feeling the muck and mire overtake my body like a rancid tyrant to a benign populace. Oh god, I'm getting too wordy in the opening monologue, so I guess let's talk about Ed Hunter. As I've mentioned previously in a video or two, my selection process for Let's Talk About is not entirely structured. Most of the time I do cover games that either I enjoyed to a degree, have caught my interest, or have been meaning to play. Bloodborne, Resident Evil Village, and JJ each fall into one of those categories, but then comes a time when I make a selection that doesn't fall under any of those stipulations. You don't hear the phrase Iron Maiden licensed out a light gun shooter for Windows 95 and not get intrigued if you're me. It's like finding the Holy Grail, one dripping hopefully not with all the world's evil branded Grail sauce, but sucker ripe with quirky designs and half-baked ideas. This can only go poorly. April 14th, 1980, a small-time album by a small-time band hits the airwaves of London to raucous applause and critical acclaim. What had just started was a 47-year legacy within the music world, entailing massive highs and steep lows, of creative ingenuity and insipid fatuity. The album and band was Iron Maiden. Jumping back a few years, 5 to be exact, Iron Maiden was the brainchild of bassist Steve Harris, who had just come off of stints from the bands Gypsy's Kiss and Smiler, leaving the latter because his songwriting wasn't to bandmates Dennis Wilcock and Doug Sampson's liking. Around the time, Steve was touring the bar scene with these bands. The Cart and Horses a regular pit stop for him, where he would meet up with guitarist Dave Murray after leaving Smiler. It is said that the Cart and Horses became the birthplace of Iron Maiden. A biography from Musician Guide reading, "The dark bent of Maiden's lyrics may be traced to mild-mannered bass player Steve Harris, a man who continued to live with his grandmother for years after Iron Maiden achieved world fame. Harris joined Dave Murray in 1976 to form Iron Maiden, debuting at the Cart and Horses pub in London's East End." Paul Di'Anno served as vocalist with Doug Sampson on drums. Harris had been gigging with a group called Smiler, during which he gained exposure to bands like Wishbone Ash. That outfit had helped introduce the practice of co-lead guitars, an innovation Maiden brought to metal. For sake of simplicity, there will be what I dub core members of the band, those being Steve, Murray, and 2 other people we will get to later. No joke, Iron Maiden is a revolving door when it comes to bandmates, changing more than the Big Show during his whole career. From Loudersound, the first incarnation of Iron Maiden was a 5-piece and featured Steve Harris on bass, Paul Day on vocals, Dave Sullivan and Terry Rance on guitar, and Ron Matthews on drum. This lineup lasted around a year, but many changes occurred before the release of the debut album, Iron Maiden, in 1980. So for the touring schedule on the pub scene, this was the lineup, but come the first EP, the eponymous album in 1980, Paul Day was replaced with Paul Di'Anno on vocals. Or to add more contrivance to this history, Paul Day was replaced with Dennis Wilcock before seeing subsequent replacement by Paul Di'Anno. From Metal Storm on Iron Maiden's early days DVD, it is mentioned that Day was sacked because he didn't have enough stage charisma. He was replaced by Dennis Wilcock, who compensated for his lack of vocal prowess with onstage theatrics in the style of Kiss. Yeah, Iron Maiden's history is more chaotic than a drunken spider spinning an equally haphazard web, what with all the changes. This is a band that has at least 26 members to its name, mimicking the likes of the Wu-Tang Clan. This is not even going into the changing of the guard for the drummers, as Ron was switched to Doug Sampson before changing to Clive Burr for health reasons before the self-titled album, or guitarists, as come Iron Maiden's second album, 1981's Killers, Dennis Stratton was swapped for core member Adrian Smith. Despite being a heavy metal band, which has its own connotations during this time period, Maiden was clean-cut compared to their contemporaries. Partying was kept to a minimum unless your name was Paul Di'Anno, while the group was touring for the Killer World Tour starting off in Japan. As Maiden was a surprise hit over there, Paul exhibited increasingly destructive behavior and his performances began to suffer. In 1982, the band replaced Di'Anno with former Samson vocalist Bruce Dickinson. The rest could be considered heavy metal history, as it was under core member Bruce that Maiden essentially became whole, out with the punk flavorings, in with heavy metal purity. Back to Musician Guide, jettisoning Iron Maiden's punk vocals in favor of the traditional metal stylings preferred by the likes of Led Zepp's Robert Plant and Deep Purple's Ian Gillan, Dickinson set the band on a new path. This seemed to sit well with fans. The band's 1982 tour sold out. In April of that year, a third record, The Number of the Beast, proved popular indeed, reaching #1 in the UK, knocking Barbra Streisand from that slot. 7 of the album's 8 songs concerned death, the other was about a prostitute. The tour supporting number reached a crescendo at New York City's Palladium when Eddie triumphantly waved aloft a bitten-off head of erstwhile Black Sabbath frontman Ozzy Osbourne. What kicked off was album after album of heavy metal goodness, with the likes of 83's Peace of Mind and 84's Power Slave solidifying Iron Maiden as a voice of heavy metal, thus allowing them to experiment come 86's Somewhere in Time. From all music now established as a powerful and unique metal band, Iron Maiden experimented on their long-awaited 1986 album Somewhere in Time, incorporating synthesized bass and guitar and futuristic themes. They continued to expand their sound and subject matter with 1988's Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, another concept album featuring the singles The Evil That Men Do and The Clairvoyant, as well as the group's first use of keyboards. It was Maiden's most critically acclaimed record since The Number of the Beast. Come the 90s though, Iron Maiden was starting to take some real hits, mostly due to creative differences. The last of what I will call the unified albums was Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, as 1990's No Prayer for the Dying saw the absence of guitarist Adrian Smith. That wasn't the biggest gap, however, as after 93's Fear of the Dark, Bruce left to follow his own career. From 8 Notes, even though metal was out of date in 1992 and grunge was ruling the airwaves, Maiden continued to sell out arenas in the US and throughout the world. Still, Dickinson continued with his raspier vocals, and much of the lyrics on Fear of the Dark were a downgrade from their previous successes. In 1993, Iron Maiden suffered a huge loss when Bruce Dickinson left the band to further pursue his solo career. However, Bruce agreed to stay with the band through the end of the year, resulting in a pair of live albums released in the fall. The band auditioned hundreds of vocalists and finally chose young gun Blaze Bayley in 1994, formerly of Wolfsbane. Bayley proved to be a worthy vocalist, but he did not have the range Dickinson possessed. After a 3-year hiatus, Maiden returned in 1995 with the hour-long album The X Factor. Following the failure that was The X Factor was 98's Virtual 11, which is where development of Ed Hunter got its start. For clarification, as I have failed to mention him, the mascot of Iron Maiden since the beginning is Eddie the Head, a multi-dimensional chaotic being, as he is seen performing different tasks on each album cover or single, such as attempting to kill Margaret Thatcher or controlling the devil. He would serve as the basis for a game that was advertised on the 96 compilation album Best of the Beast. Originally called Melt, it was scrapped for not being up to snuff. Blaze on Iron Maiden's website claiming it was crap. Maiden want to give their fans something to blow them away. The new one will. Handling development was Synthetic Dimensions, whose development resume includes a lot of home console ports, Legends of Valor, and Perfect Assassin. Coincidentally, Synthetic would go under after Ed Hunter because the CEO died of prostate cancer. Ed Hunter itself is not only the name of the game, but also the compilation album songs included voted on by fans of Maiden. There was also a tour for the album that saw the return of Adrian and Bruce. With the game trapped inside the bowels of Windows 95, you're going to have to do a bit to get the game running. Luckily, there's a video by Titch Gamer that serves as a perfect instructional guide to get this artifact working. I will note that when downloading daemon tools for free, it will try to sneakily install stuff onto your computer if you aren't paying attention, so decline any offers when loading it up the first time. To say that there is a story in Ed Hunter would be like me concluding that I instead of, I don't know, a nice ice lolly. In short, you play as a detective looking to free Eddie because somehow Iron Maiden didn't bail their man out of an asylum, or rather, they sent him there because he's a reality warper that takes you to multiple time periods and dimensions because, yeah. You fight the 4 horsemen at the end, so that's something. To be blunt, Ed Hunter is not a pretty game. You can use your eyes as we are all staring into the abyss of the uncanny valley. You'd think this was an early 3D project, but no, Ed Hunter saw light of day in 1999. You know, a year after Half-Life and other games that pushed the envelope for graphics. Hell, Reboot began in 1994, 5 years before Ed Hunter, thus damning it even further. However, despite the visuals having aged like milk on a blistering summer day, there is an appeal to them. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and so does what I will dub context. Because of how odd the existence of Ed Hunter is, the model and design work being nightmarish adds a layer of mystique to this game. While neither Drowned God nor Scratches both thematically leagues above Ed Hunter reeks with a musty fragrance of novelty, like cracking open a tomb to find out what secrets lie beneath the surface. And though this seems like a left-handed compliment, I am being truthful when I say I do like the graphics. On a more creative front, denying that there wasn't a creative vision isn't entirely giving Ed Hunter a fair shake, since each level was inspired by an album from Iron Maiden. From screen 1, you're thrust into the streets of London a la Iron Maiden and Killers, then into the asylum right out of Peace of Mind. Egypt opens up with the Power Slave Monument in all its crusty FMV glory. I will defer and say that not all the levels are great at capturing the cover art, as Hell, the Cemetery, and the Future are the most generic stages in the entire experience. The cover of The Number of the Beast might be one of the greatest metal covers of all time, but what is translated to the game is boring fire and brimstone. Likewise, the imaginative retro cyberpunk nightmare displayed in Somewhere in Time didn't translate all that well to Ed Hunter, coming across as dull. The cemetery might as well not even be within the game, as its inspiration is live after death. Outside of the opening cinematic having Eddie bust out of the grave like he did on the front, any references or callbacks get lost amidst the shambling of zombies that don't feature anywhere on the covers of Iron Maiden's discography. Stages, in short, are swings and roundabouts, as the ones that feel ripped from Iron Maiden are clashing against the rabble that are borderline uninspired. Speaking of entirely unnoteworthy, the animations. Stiff and janky don't do them justice, and like with the graphics, date this game back to the stone age of 3D. Anytime Eddie is on screen doing anything, he's seemingly this mystical being that doesn't know how limbs work despite looking human in shape. Besides fodder for laughing, the animations fall into the same trappings as the visuals, so either you'll get a kick out of the outdated and poor quality or lambast them for the time period that Ed Hunter came out. Personally, it's a bit of both for me, unlike what I said for the graphics. I could talk about the UI and character design, but do you really want me to? Nothing like lime green for my character elements and shooting what could be best described as pack filler for your choice of card game. I can at least say that enemies keep to the theming of the levels they show up in, but since every stage has a maximum of 2 different foes, expect to be dealing with a clown car parade of twins. But what makes the presentation somewhat easier to swallow is that what will be blasting through your eardrums from the minute you start Ed Hunter is Iron Maiden, heavy metal at its finest with a solid lineup of tracks, from the opening recitation of Revelation 12:12 into the melodic guitars of The Number of the Beast to the mimicking of stringed instruments and changing rhythms of Phantom of the Opera. Ed Hunter embodies the concept that the album of the same name was going for, a greatest hits collection. While not all the masterpieces are here, there is an eclectic bunch to choose from with Hallowed Be Thy Name, Power Slave, and Future Real. This is mostly up to your preference, as I do like Iron Maiden, though not all their outings. This isn't me admitting that I don't care for the OST. I enjoy metal operas, thank you very much, seeing as my favorite Metallica album happens to be the self-titled Black Album. Rounding out this section, the sound effects and voice work are there, but like with the path I've been treading down, it's middling to say the least. What carries a bulk of Ed Hunter is that Iron Maiden is personally serenading you with their dulcet tones. Ed Hunter is an on-the-rails light gun shooter. As opposed to moving where you want to go, the game does that for you, throwing you screen after screen into waves of enemies for you to shoot down. This is every level, so there's not much deviance, nor is there a lot in your offensive capabilities. From the start, you have an infinite ammo pistol able to down enemies in 1 to a few shots. While it does have to reload after 10, and there is no reload key, and shooting off-screen doesn't do that either, it serves as a steadfast companion when you don't have upgraded firepower. While going through a stage, power-ups will make themselves known to you, such as healing crosses, a disembodied head that awards points, and possibly an extra life, I don't know, and better guns. Each stage comes with its own enhanced weapon, with London the assault rifle, the cemetery the shotgun, and a few esoteric armaments in the future. These aren't permanent, as running out of ammo switches you back to the pistol, but the frequency that they show up in is a tad high, especially in the later levels where enemies take multiple hits to down. Outside of some traits like full auto, most of the upgrades deal more damage than the pistol. All weapons have to contend with recoil, as your cursor will slightly move after firing to simulate it. Most player information, as in health, lives, ammo, clip amounts, and score, is recorded on the UI at the bottom of the screen. Moving over to the threats you have to face, while some stages might have 2 groupings for you to deal with outside of health values, all kinda act the same. Move into place so that they can attack you with a projectile or rise up from the bottom and hit you with a melee attack. These projectiles range from invisible hit scans that you can't block to thrown objects that you can shoot down with some added trouble. More on that later. There is a difficulty select that is automatically set to easy when first booting up, so that tells you why I didn't bring it up at the start like I usually do. Dying in this game comes in 2 forms, running out of health and running out of lives. When you die and have a life, you respawn after clicking the screen during your countdown timer. If not, game over. Back to the beginning of the game, fucker. Hitting escape during gameplay also auto game overs you in case you have other better things to be doing with your life, as there is no pause button. Oh boy, you know it's slim pickings when I say that the best part about Ed Hunter is the soundtrack. It's classic Iron Maiden, so there's no fault on that front. If you like Maiden, then hooray! There's something you can latch onto during gameplay until it gets forcibly ripped away from you by the time you hear each song on repeat for the third time. The referential stuff is pretty great too, but at times it can be hit or miss. The Graveyard and Hell are the two weakest stages visually, having minimal connections to their albums. Heads up, Bad's gonna be pretty fun in a cathartic way. Where to start? In a first for this channel, why don't I run you through each level, as there's no such thing as a best level in Ed Hunter, only varying shades of putrid green and vile yellow. London's East End is the least offensive level in the game on merit because it serves to welcome you to the bullshit. Neither of the two hooligan types are overtly threatening, though be prepared to eat damage from the Mohawks as their thrown objects have wonky hitboxes, a problem that will persist going forward. This stage has a forked path during the beginning of the level, though none of the rest of the stages have this feature, so why it's here makes no sense. It is also within London that you come face to face with the distance issue of Ed Hunter. Sometimes enemies will be microscopic on your screen because instead of making sure your adversaries are visible and easily fired upon, let's frustrate the player with a combination of poor hit detection and minuscule hitboxes. Near the end of London do you get your first mob of enemies calling to question all the worst parts of this game, and it only goes from there in the later levels. Oh, and I do hope you like Phantom of the Opera, as London is long enough as a level to have the song loop. This is conducive to the entirety of Ed Hunter, though some levels are worse, such as Shady Pines with its incessant repeating of Wrathchild. Upon further fiddling around with the game, Ed Hunter includes a few more Iron Maiden tracks, like Run to the Hills, but you have to go within the music menu on the main screen to change the tracks. There is a randomize option, but I do not know if this prevents tracks from looping. Anyway, Shady Pines is one giant room which our detective just shifts left and right from, showcasing how poor the pacing of each stage is. For no reason, more copy-pasted enemies will pile out of the woodwork, all because we step 2 feet in one direction. In a game sense as well, why our detective simply looks left and right instead of beelining straight to Eddie's cell is nonsensical. Shady Pines marks the first inclusion of enemy attacks coming out faster than you can predict, leading into another issue that Ed Hunter wants to pile on your plate: survivability. Healing crosses have a tendency to show up either when you don't need them, such as at full health, or at the worst possible moment, like right after you die. Not that they heal you for anything worthwhile, and I don't know how extra lives are acquired. At first I thought that you just shoot the disembodied bandmates' heads, but no. Or yes. I don't know. Either way, with the frequency of enemy attacks in Shady Pines, you might have it rough going into Hell. Hell's gimmick is introducing you to enemies with high health, as the Flying Devils require way too many shots to down, and are either nuisances at worst, spawning hooded figures, or the bane of my existence if they decide to attack you directly with triple fireballs that require fast aim to stop. Hit detection makes its return once again, as sometimes hitting the devil is a gamble on whether the game wants to be generous or not. Thankfully, Hell and another level are essentially breathers right after 2 of the worst stages in Ed Hunter. The Graveyard is the bottom of the barrel in terms of Ed Hunter. Imagine all the filth and bile from a decomposing corpse falling onto your head, and that's the Graveyard. For a checklist, asinine level progression where our main character shifts his POV and zombies magically spawn in, said zombies having high health requiring the usage of the shotgun to effectively put them back under, terrible hit detection forcing you to aim for the head as sometimes body shots don't register, the shotgun having slow fire speed to the point that it's easy to get womboed by the zombies, and Fear of the Dark repeating to the point of tedium. Yet not to be outdone, the Pharaoh's Tomb ups the ante with having even spongier threats that can't be taken down in one hit, and having the second worst grouping of enemies in the game, the Scorpions and the Snakes, little bastards that are terribly hard to filter out amidst the mummies until they nibble on your feet. The final few rooms of the tomb are like a parody of bad rail shooters, the stairs leading up to the sarcophagus having creatures appearing out of thin air or impossible spaces. Speaking of the sarcophagus room, this is where the screen zoom fucks with you, tasking you with squashing bugs and snakes while they are barely a blip on your radar. As said earlier, there's another level that is a breath of air while being submerged in shit, somewhere in time, mostly because the enemies aren't annoying and the weapon of the level downs everything in 2 shots, has decent ammo, and is always given to you. It's like a last stop before true despair, as the apocalypse is where you go to die. 2 words: frame perfect. As if to compound the hit detection issue, there is an abundance of enemies within the final stage that can hit you for free if you don't immediately shoot them. The height of unfair design mixed in with the bloody background elements throwing off your shots. Do take care not to die in this stage, as you can game over right after you just did, as Ed Hunter lacks restraint. I can at least applaud with my backhand that the 4 horsemen aren't aggressive. As long as you have 1 life on standby going into the fight, you'll win even if they're annoying to damage. As if to wrap this up in one's entrails, there is no pause and no way to continue from a level. Either you play this like it's Ghostbusters 2 on the NES, or you get the fuck out. Either devote full attention to Ed Hunter like the greedy patron that it is, or be cast away from its halls of mediocrity like some peasant. It goes without saying that playing Ed Hunter is an experience, but not a good one. Any positives I can think of get washed down with outright tedium and annoyance. If I wanted to listen to Maiden, I'd pop one of their albums on or play Elden Ring. Ed Hunter's only worth besides being an album is an interactive oddity that was soon forgotten when it came out, leaving people like me to rediscover its putrid remains. With all these long videos coming out of the workshop, I wanted to return to form with something short and sweet. Granted, I made Kuga long in part because I explored tokusatsu as a genre, which through hindsight I probably didn't need to, so the joke's on me. I will admit that I probably could have gone even further for the history section regarding Iron Maiden, as there's a lot to talk about, but I wanted to hit the highlights that were more important. I did just keep to Kamen Rider and Kuga when I got to their section of the history last video. This showing of Ed Hunter is over, but stay tuned for our next feature involving the video game equivalent of cockfighting, a first release on a new console, and a whole lot of